Hello all. There have been a fair number of questions about paper 3 and I want to address them via video because it's going to be much easier for me to explain it this way, and hopefully I can touch on every single question that folks have. The simplest answer is primarily paper 3 is almost identical to paper 2. You are going to be choosing one of the pieces from the final discussion board post. So one of the poems, one of the short stories, and all you are doing is analyzing that piece for what it represents about a particular historical period, maybe a particular theme. The only caveat is that you have to look at the questions that you answered in the discussion board and think about what those questions suggest about a particular theme. For the example, I'm going to use one of your classmates' questions and talk you through how to do this. So Maddie, if you go back on the discussion board post, you can see where she answered question number 1 concerning the road not taken. And in her response, it reads in the following way. They do complicate the poem in an interesting way because without the middle stanzas, there really would not be a huge point to the poem. This poem is all about deciding between 2 different options or paths, and this clearly is not an easy decision for the narrator. If it was an easy decision, the middle stanzas would not be necessary, and the poem would not correctly portray the author's message of all the thought and speculation that goes into decisions such as this. If I were to look at this answer that she provided, what that answer suggests is that there is more to decision making than just black and white. If I was to write a paper about this particular theme of decision making, i.e. that it is difficult, that it takes speculation, that it takes time, that there's a process, I would maybe think about doing research on the decision-making process. That would be my first thought, right? Because it's not just about the black and white of the road not taken of just a decision. It's the fact that there are things that go into it that make decision-making oftentimes so difficult. So a working thesis that I may start with is literally taking from what Maddie said and placing it into a phrase, like, the road not taken is primarily about a decision. However, it more deeply expounds upon the thought and speculation that decision-making requires. That's the very simplistic definition. I would then go back to the poem and start thinking about a couple questions that I would have in terms of the author, in terms of the period of time, maybe in terms of some of the images that he uses, which would help me generate an argument that I was going to make. So I would think first, okay, so how old was this author when he wrote this? What was the time period during which he wrote it? Was there something in his biography perhaps that was happening that inspired this particular poem? Was there something going on historically that may have created this need to write about a particular decision? Was he at a crossroads? Were we as the world at a particular crossroads? And my answers to those questions would really dictate then what research I would do. So a very simple paper, first and foremost, might be, perhaps I just want to think about the road not taken in terms of the psychology of decision making. If that's the case, then I would go into the library database on the CCBC homepage and I would do research on the psychology of decisions. I would want to know what people in psychology have said about what the decision-making process is. Then what I would do is take what I found in my research in terms of the psychology of decision-making, and I would plant it into my answer or my response in my essay, and each body paragraph would focus on one particular aspect of decision making. I would then go back to the poem and see if I can find representations in the poem that represent those particular processes of decision making, right? So is speculation one of the things that I would do to make a decision? If that's the case, I would want research from psychology that shows me that speculation is one part of the process, and then I would then add an example from the poem that represents the author speculating, right, or questioning his decision. Some of the other points that I want to make about this paper, I don't want you guys to get bogged down in providing another side. I'm more interested in you analyzing the poem for what it represents about a particular theme, or what perhaps the author is grappling with in terms of the human condition. So in this instance, it's about decision making. Some of the other questions that we had were in terms of the length. So it is 4 to 6 pages in length. Times New Roman font. There have been a fair number of folks who have had trouble with MLA formatting. Please, please, please look up Purdue OWL. Check what MLA formatting requires in terms of where your course information goes, where the title goes. Everything is 12-point Times New Roman font throughout. Please do not bold your titles, make them larger than the other parts of the paper. Everything should be uniform. Works cited pages are double-spaced, alphabetized based on author last name. There were also a fair number of questions in terms of paper 2. Let me make sure that you guys are very, very clear on this. First and foremost, you earn the grades that you receive in this course. I do not provide grades to people. If you are working hard, if you are writing, if you're going to the writing center, that's fine, and that's going to help you continuously improve. However, if you want to earn an A or earn a B in a class, you have to put in the requisite time and take the time to review your drafts, edit your drafts, and then go back and see if there's a way to improve them further. You have to work hard in order to receive the grade that you receive. Teachers are not going to just assign you a grade because they feel that that's what you deserve. Those are the grades that you end up getting based on the work that you put in, but also the quality of work that you're putting out, right? All of your teachers are trying to prepare you for the courses that you have moving forward, and they're just going to get more and more difficult as time progresses. English 102 is very different from the work that you perform in English 101. You should expect that it's going to be more difficult and that you have to put in more time and effort in order to get the grade that you hope for. The other thing that I want to add about your papers, if you didn't receive the grade that you want, chances are there were a couple issues with your writing that I want you to think about for this final paper. Foremost, check your thesis statement. If you cannot find the thesis statement, that means that I cannot find it. It should have 2 parts to it. It should have your argument, and it should also have a list of the main subtopics that you're going to cover in each of your body paragraphs. The second thing that you need to check for is that everything in your paper is organized. Each body paragraph matches up to something that you list in your thesis statement. You should have a transitional phrase that literally spells out for me what that body paragraph is going to be discussing. Then when you get into the body paragraph itself, think about it in terms of a discrete essay in and of itself. It should have that topic sentence, which is like the thesis statement of a paper. It's going to give me a main idea of what that body paragraph is going to be discussing. Next, you're going to have organized sentences to follow that then build on that argument that you set up in that thesis statement. Think about that in terms of the body paragraphs of a paper. Then you'll have a transitional phrase at the end that's like a conclusion that sums everything up and then gets you ready to start thinking about the next body paragraph that's coming up. You want to demonstrate that there's a connection between each of your body paragraphs. They're not individual, isolated little islands. They're actually things that work together to help to create the argument that you're venturing. The next thing that I would get you guys to think about is in terms of clarity within your body paragraphs. I would say at least 85% of students in the class have had trouble with clarity within body paragraphs. There have been papers I've been reading through where it's difficult for me to identify exactly what it is that you're talking about. Make sure that each sentence and each example is related back to 2 things. It's related back to a main argument that you're venturing in that body paragraph and a main idea that you're trying to expound on in the larger paper, right? So the body paragraph is a discrete subtopic that then must relate back to the larger argument that you're trying to venture throughout your entire paper. Make sure that every example you use, it's clear why that example is there. Make sure you have at least 2 to 3 sentences of discussion that demonstrate to the reader why that example was used and how it relates back to not only that subtopic, but also the overarching argument that you're making for the entire paper. The next thing that I would say is that if you lost credit, chances are that you didn't take the time to read through your paper to check for grammatical and sentence level errors. If you read your sentences out loud, sometimes you'll be able to catch some of those grammatical errors that maybe fly past you when you're just reading it in the black and white page. You can actually hear when a sentence doesn't sound quite the way that you want it to sound. The other thing that I would suggest is double checking your comma placement. A lot of folks are missing commas in places where they are necessary. Commas, if you need help with those, the suggestion is that you think about placing commas in places where there's a natural pause to your sentence. So read them out loud to yourself again and think about those natural places where there is a pause. Chances are you need a comma there. My other suggestion would be is to consult one of the handbooks that you have available to you. You can use the Little Seagull Handbook. You can use Diana Hacker's Guide for Writers. Purdue OWL also has some places where you can work on your grammar. So think about some of those options that you have available to you and integrate that into your process of writing. The last thing that I would say is make sure that you expound on your point as deeply as possible. There have been a fair number of folks in the class who, not just in discussion board posts, but also in the essays that you submit, have not been going deeply enough into the analysis and the argument. It's not enough to just give me a report on something. In English 102, we're asking you to do an analysis. So I want you to think more deeply about the pieces that we're reading. So again, The Road Not Taken, very simply, is about a decision. But it's not quite that simple, right? Or he wouldn't have thought about writing the poem. What's the point? Why would someone have you read it? And that is what you should focus your attention on when you're writing papers for the course. In terms of any other questions that you might have, I'm glad to answer them. I'm hoping that I covered everything for you, but as long as you follow along with what we did for paper 2, you're on the right track for what I'm looking for paper 3. Really all it is again, an analysis of a piece that we read at the end of this semester, and you are venturing an argument concerning one aspect of that piece. Does it highlight something about the particular culture? Does it highlight something in particular about the human condition? And I want you guys to focus your answers on that very question. Thank you, and I look forward to reading everything that you submit in the next couple days.